The river may be receding, but after a wet spring, people may also still want to think about flood insurance.
Western Mass News meteorologist Don Maher is live for us this morning in Northampton with more on that. Good morning, Don.
Good morning, Chris, and good morning, Brittany. And as you guys are mentioning, the river certainly is going down. In fact, it's been about less than a week since we were here, and the river certainly has been receding, which is good news. And the flooding so far this spring really has been relatively minor. But of course, we know it's just a matter of time before we do start to see some major rises on the river. And that should get you thinking about ways to protect your home and your possessions. And one of those ways is by purchasing flood insurance.
It's been a wet spring, but not the worst. Just think back to May of 1984 when the Connecticut River in Northampton last rose to a major flood state. It should have some homeowners thinking about flood insurance.
I would recommend everybody be educated in flood insurance and the cost of risk.
Chris McMaster, Vice President of Phillips Insurance in Chicopee, tells Western Mass News that many people think their homeowner's insurance will cover flood damage, but that is just not the case.
Most homeowners and business owners' policies exclude flood coverage.
Some may think that if their home is damaged due to flooding, that disaster assistance from FEMA will cover their losses. According to data from FEMA and floodsmart.gov, a flooding incident must be declared a federal disaster by the president before FEMA assistance becomes available. Federal disaster declarations are issued in less than 50% of flooding events, but Chris tells me that no states are immune to flooding.
Over the past 5 years, all 50 states in the country have been impacted by some sort of flood or flash flooding.
Even if a disaster declaration is made, disaster assistance typically comes in two forms. A FEMA disaster grant, which is around $5,000 per household, or a U.S. Small Business Administration loan, which must be paid back with interest. And if you think you are not at risk for flooding just because you don't live in a high-risk area, think again.
20% of the nation's flooding comes from a low-hazard area.
There may even be some instances where you may be required to purchase flood insurance.
If there's a loan or a mortgage on a building or property, and it's in a high-hazard area, the banks will require you to have flood insurance before they'll approve the loan.
In addition, if you live in a zone that is considered a high risk for flooding and you've received federal disaster assistance in the form of low-interest disaster loans from the U.S. Small Business Administration or in the form of grants from FEMA following a presidential disaster declaration, you must maintain flood insurance in order to be considered for any future federal disaster aid.
And you may be thinking, well, I don't live in a zone that's at a high risk for flooding. Do I really need to purchase flood insurance? Well, coming up in our next half hour, we'll give you a few reasons why maybe you should still consider purchasing flood insurance for your home. For now, I'm live in Northampton. First warning meteorologist Don Maher. Brittany and Chris, send it back to you in the studio.